Mara's legs gave out without warning. 1 second she was standing near the far edge of the ballroom, gripping a glass of water she had not yet sipped, watching the crowd move in circles she did not belong to. The next second the glass slipped from her fingers and shattered across the marble floor, and she was falling, her shoulder catching the edge of a decorative pillar before the rest of her crumpled against it and slid down to the ground. Nobody moved toward her. The music kept playing. A few heads turned, caught a glimpse of the girl in the worn blue dress lying half-conscious on the ballroom floor, and then turned back to their conversations. Someone laughed nearby, not at her specifically, just at something someone else said, but the sound felt pointed all the same. A woman in a red gown stepped around Mara's outstretched leg as though she were a piece of furniture that had been moved to an inconvenient place. Mara pressed her palm flat against the cold marble and tried to push herself upright. Her arm shook. Her vision was narrowing at the edges, a slow gray closing in from both sides, and her stomach was a hollow ache that had stopped feeling like hunger 2 days ago and had started feeling like nothing at all, like the absence of something so complete it had become its own kind of presence. She had not eaten since Thursday morning. It was now Saturday night. The food on the long tables across the room smelled like warm bread and roasted meat and something sweet she could not name, and the smell was so strong from where she lay on the floor that it made her eyes water. She had walked past those tables 3 times since arriving. Each time she had told herself she would go back, she would take a plate, nobody would notice or care. Each time something had stopped her, the awareness of how she looked, how out of place she was, the fear that someone would say something or look at her in the way people had been looking at her for most of her life, like she was a problem that had not yet been solved. Her uncle had told her to come. He had not offered to drive her. He had not asked if she needed anything. He had simply said that attendance was required and that she should not embarrass the family, and then he had gone back to watching television with a plate of food balanced on his knee. She had borrowed the dress from the woman 2 doors down, a kind neighbor named Olive who was too polite to say that the dress was 3 sizes too large or that the hem had been repaired poorly in 2 places. Mara had taken in the sides with safety pins hidden beneath a thin belt. She had ironed it carefully. She had done her hair herself, pulling it up into something that looked intentional from a distance even if it wasn't. She had looked in the mirror before leaving and thought, this is enough, this will be enough, nobody is going to look at you anyway. And she had been right. Nobody looked at her. Not when she arrived. Not when she stood near the windows watching others greet each other with warmth she had forgotten the feeling of, not when she walked slowly along the edges of the room trying to look like someone who had somewhere to be. The hall itself was almost impossible to describe without sounding like you were making it up. The ceilings were high enough that the chandeliers seemed to float, and the light they threw across the room was golden in a way that made everyone look better than they were. The floor was pale marble with dark veining, the kind of floor that cost more per square foot than Mara earned in a month. The tables were set with white cloth and flowers that someone had arranged to look effortless, which meant they had probably taken hours. The guests wore things that Mara had only seen in photographs, heavy fabrics and careful tailoring and jewelry that caught the light when they moved. She did not belong here. She had known that before she came. She had come anyway because she had no choice, because the summons did not ask for her opinion, because the Alpha King's annual mating ball was not something you declined or attended halfway. Mara pressed her forehead against the cool pillar and closed her eyes. She was 22 years old. She had grown up in a house where food was conditional, where kindness was rationed, where she had learned early to take up as little space as possible and ask for as little as possible and want as little as possible so that the disappointment of not having things would not be so heavy. She had built a life on that foundation. It was not a good life. It was a life. It was the one she had. She was not crying. She did not cry easily, and she was not about to start doing it on the floor of the most important room in the territory with 300 people close enough to notice. She just needed a moment. She just needed her vision to clear and her legs to cooperate, and she would stand up and she would walk out of this hall and go home and drink a glass of water and figure out the rest tomorrow. She pushed against the pillar again. Her arm buckled. The gray at the edges of her vision moved inward. She heard the music stop. Not fade. Stop. One moment the orchestra was playing, and then there was silence, the kind of silence that happens when something interrupts rather than concludes. The sound of conversation dropped away in a wave moving from somewhere across the room toward where she was sitting on the floor. Mara opened her eyes. He was walking toward her. She did not know his face well. She had only ever seen him in photographs and once from a very long distance at a public event she had attended as part of a crowd. But there was no possibility of mistaking him. Not because of the way he was dressed, though he was dressed in a way that managed to look simple and expensive at the same time, dark fabric with no visible effort and yet clearly every detail chosen. Not because of the way the crowd parted for him, though they did, immediately and without his having to ask. It was the way he moved. Like a man who had never once in his life needed to consider whether he was allowed to be somewhere. He crossed the ballroom floor in a direction that made no sense to anyone watching, because the direction was toward the corner where a girl in a borrowed dress was half sitting against a pillar on the ground, and that was not where anyone with any reason would be going. He crouched down in front of her. Not beside her. In front of her, so that he had to look up slightly to meet her eyes, which meant that she, for one bewildering moment, was looking slightly down at the Alpha King. His eyes were dark. His face was still. He did not look at her the way people had been looking at her all evening, past her or around her or through her. He looked at her directly, the way you look at something you are genuinely trying to understand. He said, quietly, "Can you stand?" Mara opened her mouth. Closed it. Tried again. "I think so," she said, which was not entirely true. He did not ask again. He simply extended his hand, and she looked at it for a moment that lasted longer than it should have, and then she took it, and he helped her to her feet with a steadiness that made the action feel completely ordinary even though nothing about it was. She was upright for exactly 3 seconds before her legs decided they had made an error in judgment. He caught her before she went down again. His grip on her arm was firm and sure, and there was no hesitation in it, no moment of deciding whether to act. He simply acted. Behind him, Mara heard movement. She looked past his shoulder and saw a man in a formal uniform stepping forward with the particular expression of someone who has been assigned to manage inconvenient situations. He was reaching toward her. His hand was almost on her other arm. The Alpha King turned his head. Just his head. Not his whole body. He looked at the man in the uniform and said one thing, not loudly, with complete calm. "Step back." The man stopped as though he had walked into a wall. Nobody else moved. Mara stood in the middle of the most powerful room she had ever entered, held upright by a hand that belonged to the most powerful person she had ever been near, and she felt, under the hollow ache of hunger and the slow embarrassment of having collapsed in public, something else entirely. She felt, for the first time in a very long time, like something worth protecting. She did not know what to do with that feeling. She filed it away in the part of herself where she put things she could not afford to examine closely. There were practical matters to attend to. Her legs were still not fully cooperative. The room was still completely silent. 300 people were watching her without the courtesy of pretending they were not. The Alpha King did not look at the crowd. He looked at her. "What is your name?" he said. Her voice, when it came, was steadier than she expected. "Mara," she said. "Mara Ellison." He nodded once, as though she had confirmed something he needed to know. "All right, Mara Ellison," he said. "Let's get you somewhere quiet." He did not ask for permission. He did not check to see if the crowd approved. He simply began walking, keeping one hand at her arm to steady her, and she walked beside him because her body was making that decision before her mind could object, and the crowd parted in front of them without a word, and the music did not start again until they were already through the door. Mara did not look back. But she heard the silence behind her, and it felt different from the silence she had always carried. That silence had been the silence of being ignored. This one was the silence of being seen, and she was not sure yet which one frightened her more. She focused on walking. On keeping her legs under her. On the warmth of the hand at her arm that was the only thing standing between her and the floor. She focused on those things and not on the fact that her life, without her having done anything at all to cause it, had just changed direction entirely. Outside the ballroom doors, the hallway was quiet and the air was cooler and she could breathe properly for the first time all evening. She had come to this ball expecting nothing. She had gotten nothing wrong. What she had not expected was this. She had no idea yet what this was. But she walked forward, and the Alpha King walked beside her, and for now that was all there was. The hallway outside the ballroom was long and lit with wall sconces that gave off a softer light than the chandeliers inside. The floor was the same marble but the space was quieter, the sound of the crowd behind them muffled to a low hum, and Mara felt the difference immediately, like pressure releasing from something she had not realized was compressed. She was still walking. That was something. Her legs were not fully reliable but they were doing the basic job, which was more than they had been doing 4 minutes ago on the floor of that ballroom. The Alpha King kept his pace slow without making it obvious he was doing so. He did not look at her while they walked. He looked ahead, and his expression was calm, and he did not speak, which she was grateful for because she had absolutely no idea what she would have said. His name was Dorian Voss. She knew that much. Everyone in the territory knew that much. He had taken over from his father 6 years ago, and his reputation was the kind that you heard about before you could form your own opinion, the kind that arrived in rooms before he did. People said he was fair. People also said he was exacting. People said he was not warm but that he was honest, which was a different thing, and sometimes more valuable. People said a great many things about him, the way they do about powerful men whose actual selves remain at a distance from those who watch them. Mara had no opinion on any of it. She had spent her life too far from the center of things to have opinions about the people at the center. She had been focused on smaller concerns. Getting through each day. Keeping herself fed when she could. Not drawing attention. She had failed spectacularly at the last one tonight. Dorian stopped in front of a door at the end of the hallway, opened it without a key, and held it for her. She stepped inside. The room was not what she expected. She had prepared herself mentally for something functional, an office maybe, or a small waiting area where you might put someone who needed to sit down for a few minutes before being sent home. What she stepped into instead was a room that was clearly meant for important guests. High ceilings, heavy curtains pulled back from tall windows, a wide sofa in dark fabric, a low table set near a small fireplace where a fire had already been burning for some time. She stood just inside the door and did not move further in. Dorian crossed to a side table and lifted a receiver. He spoke quietly into it. She caught the words physician and water and something else she did not quite hear. He set the receiver down and turned back to her. "Sit down," he said. Not unkindly. It was a statement of what should happen next, not a command issued with impatience. She sat on the edge of the sofa, the way you sit when you are not sure you are allowed to take up more space than the absolute minimum. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her back was straight. She had spent so many years making herself small that the posture was automatic. He sat in the chair across from her, and he looked at her again with that direct, unhurried attention, and she looked back because she was not sure where else to look. "When did you last eat?" he said. She had expected many possible opening questions. That was not one of them. She was not prepared for it and so her answer came before she could decide whether to soften it. "Thursday morning," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone searching for a response. The quiet of someone absorbing information and deciding what to do with it. "It's Saturday," he said. "I know." He did not react with pity. His expression did not shift into something soft or uncomfortable. It stayed steady, which she found, surprisingly, easier to handle than pity would have been. Pity required a response. Steadiness just required you to sit with the truth of what you had just said. There was a knock at the door. A woman entered with a tray, water, a bowl of clear broth, bread, sliced fruit arranged in a way that made it look like someone had been thoughtful about it. The woman set the tray on the low table without a word and left the same way. Mara looked at the tray. She looked at the broth. She could smell the warmth coming off it. "Please," Dorian said, gesturing toward the table. She did not need to be told twice. She picked up the bowl of broth and drank it carefully, not quickly, the way you eat when your body has forgotten the habit and you do not want to shock it into rejecting what you are giving it. She ate a piece of bread. She drank most of the water. She did not eat everything on the tray because she knew better than to do that, but she ate enough that the gray at the edges of her vision pulled back and her hands stopped trembling. When she set the bowl down, she became aware that he had not moved and had not spoken the entire time she was eating. He had simply sat in the chair across from her and let her eat without commentary or observation or the particular kind of watching that makes you feel like a thing being studied. It was the most consideration anyone had shown her in recent memory. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "Then, who is your guardian?" "My uncle. Owen Ellison." "Does he live in the territory?" "East Side. Cedar Row." Dorian did not write anything down. He filed it the way people file things when they intend to do something with it. "Has this happened before?" he said. "Going without food for that length of time?" Mara thought about how to answer. Not whether to answer honestly, because something about this room and this conversation made dishonesty feel beside the point. But how to frame it, what shape to put around the truth so it did not sound like a complaint or a plea for something. "Not to this extent," she said finally. "Usually I manage better. This week was difficult." "In what way?" She looked at the fire. "I lost my part-time job at the beginning of the month. I have been looking for another one. In the meantime, things have been tight." "And your uncle?" She looked back at him. "My uncle has his own household to manage." It was not an answer. He knew it was not an answer. He did not press it, but something in his expression shifted by a fraction, and she had the feeling that he had heard what she had not said as clearly as if she had said it. She had lived with Owen Ellison since she was 9 years old. In 13 years, he had done the minimum required to be called her guardian and not one thing more. He had not been cruel in any obvious, nameable way. He had simply not been present. Not emotionally, not practically, not in any of the ways that mattered when a child needed someone to matter to them. He provided 4 walls and a roof and an address. He ate first. He bought food for himself and bought enough for her to get by on, and when money was short, as it often was, her portion was the one that decreased. She had stopped expecting anything from him by the time she was 12. By 15, she had learned to make do entirely on her own. By 22, she had gotten very good at it, good enough that most of the time she could get through a week without anyone noticing how close to the edge she was running. This week, she had run out of edge. She had tried to eat before coming tonight. There was nothing in the kitchen. She had told herself she would manage, that the ball was only a few hours, that she could hold herself together for a few hours. She had miscalculated. She did not say any of this to Dorian Voss. She said it in the version that lived inside her, the complete one, while she said the abbreviated version aloud, the one that gave facts without the full shape of them. He was watching her in a way that suggested he was reading more than she was offering, but he did not press. "You will stay here tonight," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The physician is coming to look at you. You are not in a state to travel, and I am not sending you back to a house where there is nothing to eat." He said it as a statement of logistics, not a debate. "There is a guest room through that door. It is yours for tonight." Tomorrow we can talk about what comes next. Mara stared at him. She had spent so much of her life waiting for the moment when someone would decide she was worth the trouble, and it had never come, and she had eventually stopped waiting and made peace with its not coming. She had built herself into someone who did not need it to come. And now it was arriving, inconveniently, in the middle of a night when she was too depleted to defend herself against it properly. "I don't need charity," she said, and her voice came out steady, which she was proud of. "I know," he said. "This is not charity. It is basic provision. There is a difference." She wanted to argue. She was too tired to argue. The broth and the bread had helped, but they had also reminded her body how exhausted it was, and she was fighting to keep her eyes from going heavy. "One night," she said. "One night," he agreed. She looked at the fire again. Outside the tall windows, the night was fully dark, and in the distance she could just make out lights from the main hall where 300 people were still dancing and talking and doing all the things people did at events that were not intended for people like her. She thought about the woman in the red gown who had stepped around her on the floor. She thought about the music that had kept playing. She thought about what it had cost her to come here tonight, the borrowed dress, the careful hair, the long walk from the bus stop in shoes that were not quite right, and how none of it had mattered until a man she had never spoken to chose to walk across a ballroom in a direction that made no sense. She did not understand why he had done it. She intended to ask, eventually. Tonight she was too tired to ask and not sure she would know what to do with the answer. She stood up slowly, testing her legs. They held. "Good night," she said. Dorian Voss stood when she stood, which was a gesture so unfamiliar that it took her a moment to recognize it for what it was. A small courtesy. The kind extended to someone you considered worth extending it to. "Good night, Mara," he said. "Sleep well." She walked to the door he had indicated and opened it and went through, and on the other side was a room with a proper bed and clean sheets and a lamp casting warm light across the floor, and she sat on the edge of the bed and took off her borrowed shoes and lay down without undressing further, and she was asleep within minutes. She did not dream about the ball. She did not dream about hunger or borrowed dresses or cold marble floors. She dreamed about something she could not name when she woke, only that it had been warm, and that she had not been alone in it, and that she had not spent the entire time wondering when she would have to leave. That was enough, for now. That was more than enough. By morning, the story of what had happened in the ballroom had already spread through the territory like water finding its level through every crack and channel available. By the time Mara woke to sunlight coming through curtains she had not closed properly, 3 different versions of the story existed, and none of them were entirely accurate, and all of them agreed on the essential facts. The Alpha King had stopped the music, sent away the official who tried to remove the girl, and walked her out of the ballroom himself. The territory had not seen anything like it in living memory. Mara did not know any of this when she opened her eyes. She knew only that she was in a room she did not recognize, in a bed that was softer than anything she had slept on in years, and that someone had left a tray on the table near the window while she slept. Not broth this time. A full breakfast, eggs, toast, fruit, a pot of something hot that turned out to be tea when she poured it. She sat by the window and ate and looked out at the grounds, which were green and well kept and entirely different from the view from her room at Owen's house, which was the side wall of the building next door. She was still eating when there was a soft knock at the door and a woman came in, not the same one as last night, and introduced herself as Clara. She said she worked for the household and that the Alpha King had asked her to let Mara know that he would be available to speak with her whenever she was ready, and that there was no rush. Mara finished her breakfast. She tidied herself as best she could, which was limited given she had the clothes she had arrived in and nothing else. She pinned the safety pins back into the sides of the dress. She redid her hair. She looked at herself in the mirror in the adjoining bathroom and made a decision that she was going to walk into whatever came next with her head up, because she had not come this far by flinching, and she was not going to start now. Dorian was in a room down the hall, not the same room as the night before but an office, smaller, with a desk covered in papers and 2 chairs near a window. He stood when she came in. She still had not gotten used to that. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Better," she said. "Thank you. For last night." He nodded and gestured to the chair. She sat. He sat across from her, and there was a moment of quiet that was not uncomfortable exactly but had a weight to it, the weight of things that were about to be said that mattered. "I spoke with someone this morning," he said, "about your uncle." She went very still. "What kind of conversation?" "An inquiry. Nothing formal yet." He looked at her steadily. "I wanted to understand the situation before making any decisions." She understood what he was saying and what he was not saying. "You don't need to make any decisions about my situation," she said. "I'm an adult. I manage my own affairs." "You collapsed from hunger at a formal event," he said, without cruelty, just as a point of fact. "That tells me something is not being managed well." It was the kind of directness that could have felt like an attack. Coming from him, sitting across from her in a quiet room with the morning light coming through the window, it felt like something else. Like someone saying a true thing because they trusted her to hear it. She exhaled. "It was a bad week." "Yes," he said. "Tell me about it." She had not told anyone about her weeks in a long time. There was no one to tell. She had become very practiced at carrying things alone, at compressing them into something small enough to fit inside her without being visible from the outside. She had gotten good at it. She was not sure what made her answer honestly. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that he had already seen her at her lowest point, on the floor of his ballroom with her borrowed dress and her shaking hands and her complete inability to stand up without help. There was not a great deal left to protect after that. So she told him. The job she had lost, a small administrative position that had been posted as temporary and had lasted 8 months before ending without notice. The 3 weeks since, applying for other positions, getting one interview, not getting the job. The way the money had run out gradually and then completely. The kitchen that had been empty for 4 days. Owen, who had not noticed or had noticed and had not mentioned it, she was no longer sure which. She talked for about 15 minutes. He did not interrupt her. He did not interject with advice or observation. He simply listened, with the specific quality of attention that makes the person speaking feel like what they are saying is worth the time it takes to say it. When she stopped, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I would like to offer you a formal arrangement." She waited. "There is a position in the household administration that opened 3 weeks ago. It is a genuine post, not something invented. It requires someone with organizational ability and attention to detail. It comes with a salary, a housing stipend, and access to the household provisions." He paused. "I am not offering it to you because I pity you. I am offering it because you need work and I have a position that needs filling, and those two things aligning at the same time is not charity, it is practicality." Mara looked at him for a long moment. "Why did you come across the ballroom?" she said. He blinked slightly. Not a large reaction, a small shift, as though the question had come from an angle he had not expected. "Because you were on the floor and nobody was moving," he said. 300 people in that room," she said. "None of them moved either." "I know. So why you?" He looked at her in that steady, direct way. "Because I was watching and I saw you before you fell. I saw you standing near the wall for over an hour, not eating, not drinking, not speaking to anyone. I saw the way you were holding yourself up." He paused. "I have been in rooms full of people performing fine when they were not fine. I know what it looks like. You were not performing. You were simply running out of what you had, right there in the middle of the room, and everyone around you had decided it was not their concern." Mara's jaw tightened. Not from upset. From the effort of not letting it show that what he had just said had landed somewhere deep and precise. "And it was yours," she said. It became mine when nobody else made it theirs, he said. She looked at the window. She looked at the grounds outside, green and steady and indifferent to the conversation happening inside. She thought about Owen and the kitchen and the 3 weeks of applications and the borrowed dress with the safety pins that had held her together in more ways than one. She looked back at Dorian Voss. I will consider the position, she said. That is all I am asking, he said. She stood, and he stood, and they were eye level with each other in the morning light, and she thought about what it meant that the first person who had actually looked at her in years was also the last person she would have expected to. She left the office with nothing resolved and everything shifted, and she walked back down the hallway thinking that the problem with being seen after a very long time of being invisible was that you had absolutely no idea what you were supposed to do next. She would figure it out. She always figured things out. It was what she did. But for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she was not figuring it out entirely alone. The position was real. She found that out within 48 hours of accepting it. Mara had expected, privately, to discover that it had been created for her benefit, that it was a kind fiction wrapped in official-sounding language to make the help easier to accept. She had prepared herself for that possibility the way she prepared for most disappointments, by locating it in advance and getting comfortable with it before it arrived. What she found instead was a desk with 18 months of disorganized files on it, an inbox with 462 unanswered messages sorted into folders that made no visible sense, 2 assistants who had been covering the role between them while also doing their own jobs and were very clearly exhausted, and a handwritten list of ongoing responsibilities that covered 3 full pages. She sat down at the desk on her first morning, read the 3 pages twice, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time, the specific, grounding satisfaction of a problem that was large enough to require her full attention. She got to work. The housing stipend had allowed her to secure a small apartment on the estate grounds, not in the main house but in a converted building nearby that had 6 units, each occupied by household staff. It was the smallest of the 6 units, 1 room with a kitchen alcove and a bathroom, but it was clean and it was hers in a way that the room at Owen's house had never been hers. And on the first night she spent there she sat on the floor with her back against the wall and looked at the 4 walls around her and understood for the first time in years what it felt like to be in a space where no one could ask you to leave. She had not gone back to Owen's. She had sent him a message saying she had found alternative housing and would collect her belongings at a time that was convenient. He had replied with 2 words, "Fine, then." She had read that reply 4 times looking for something additional in it and found nothing, and then she had put her phone down and made herself a cup of tea with the kettle she had bought from the small stipend advance Dorian's office had arranged. She did not tell anyone at work about Owen. She did not explain herself or her situation or how she had come to be here. She showed up, she did the job, she did it well, and after the first week the 2 exhausted assistants began exhaling visibly when she walked in, which she took as a positive sign. What she could not control was the way the story of the ballroom followed her. The household had its own internal world, its own social landscape, its own hierarchies and alliances and the specific kind of gossip that circulates in places where people spend their days in close proximity to power. Everyone knew who she was. Everyone knew how she had come to be there. Some of them were generous about it. Others were not. The woman who managed the domestic schedule was named Harriet, and she had been in her position for 11 years, and she had watched 3 previous household administrators come and go, and she had an expression she deployed when she felt something was beneath her comment that managed to communicate more disapproval than most people could convey with full sentences. She deployed it regularly in Mara's direction. There were others. A man named Gerard who worked in estate management and who made a point of asking Mara questions at meetings in a tone that suggested he was testing rather than inquiring. A small group of women who ate lunch together and whose table Mara walked past every day and who sometimes paused their conversation as she passed in a way that resumed the moment she had gone by. She had encountered versions of this all her life. She knew how to move through it without letting it stop her. She kept her head up and her work excellent, and she did not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing it land. What she had not prepared for was Dorian. She saw him rarely in those first weeks. The estate was large, his schedule was dense, her role did not bring her into regular contact with him. She crossed paths with him twice in the first 10 days, both times in hallways, both times brief. He acknowledged her each time with the same direct nod he probably gave everyone, and she acknowledged him back, and they moved on. She had been perfectly fine with this arrangement. It was, in fact, the arrangement she had hoped for. Clean lines, professional distance, no reason for anyone to look at her situation and see anything other than an employee doing her job. And then he walked into the administrative office on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks into her tenure, closed the door behind him, sat down across from her desk, and said, "How is it going?" She set down her pen. "The files are reorganized. The backlog is approximately 60% cleared. I have set up a new sorting system for the ongoing correspondence that should prevent the accumulation from happening again." "I know," he said. "Petra told me." Petra was one of the 2 assistants. "I am not asking about the files." Mara looked at him. "I am asking how you are," he said, and he said it in the same way he said everything, directly and without performance, and she had the impression that if she gave him a non-answer he would wait quietly until she provided a real one. She was not accustomed to being asked. She could not remember the last time someone had asked in a way that meant it. "I am fine," she said. "Better. The apartment is good. The work is good. And the rest of it?" She tilted her head. "The rest of what?" "This place can be difficult to navigate," he said. "Particularly when people know your history with it." He paused. "Particularly when your arrival was not quiet." She looked at him steadily. "Are you asking me if people are being unkind?" "I am asking if you are handling it or if it is becoming a problem that needs addressing." She thought about Harriet's expression and Gerard's testing questions and the table that went quiet when she passed. "I am handling it," she said. He nodded, and she had the feeling he believed her but had not entirely stopped watching the situation. She found she did not mind that. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why do you keep checking on me?" He looked at her with a slight shift in his expression, not quite surprise, something adjacent to it. "Because I brought you here," he said. "That means I have a responsibility toward how things go for you in this place." "You offered me a job," she said. "That is not the same thing as bringing me here." "In this context it is," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, I have watched people be placed in difficult situations and then left without support to navigate them, and I have seen how that ends. I do not intend for that to happen here." Mara looked at her desk. At the newly organized files, the cleared inbox, the system she had built in 3 weeks out of 18 months of chaos. "I am not fragile," she said. "I know," he said. "I have not treated you as though you are." She looked back at him. He was right. He had not. He had given her work, not a shelter. He had offered her competence, not rescue. The distinction mattered enormously to her and she had noticed it from the beginning. "Then why?" she said, and the question was more honest than she had intended, the kind of honest that slips out when you have not quite finished deciding whether to ask something. He held her gaze for a moment before answering. "Because you spent a very long time in a situation where no one thought it was worth the effort," he said. "And I think that is one of the larger wastes I have seen in recent memory." The room was quiet. Outside, she could hear the sound of the grounds through the window she had left slightly open, wind through grass, a distant bird. She did not know what to say to that. She was not sure there was anything to say. So she said nothing, and he let her say nothing, and they sat in the quiet of it together for a moment before he stood and said he had a meeting to get to and that she should let him know if anything in the role required adjustment. She said she would. He left. She sat at her desk for a long time after that, not working, just sitting. Thinking about waste and worth and how strange it was that someone who had no reason to notice had noticed. How strange that the noticing had happened at all, and that it kept happening, in small and consistent ways that were adding up to something she did not yet have a name for. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. But something had shifted, finally and permanently, like a door that had moved a fraction of an inch and could not be entirely closed again. 3 days later, the first formal complaint arrived. It came through official channels, which meant it had been written down and submitted, which meant someone had felt strongly enough to commit the effort. Mara found out about it not from Dorian's office but from Petra, who came to her desk looking uncomfortable and handed her a printed sheet and said she thought Mara should see it before it went further. 2 names were on the complaint. One was a woman named Sylvia Crane, who held a senior position in the estate's social management division and who Mara had never directly encountered but who had, apparently, encountered her from a distance at the ball. The second was a man named Hugh Forster, who was on the territory's governing council and who Mara knew by name only. The complaint stated that the hiring of Mara Ellison into a household position represented a conflict of interest given the circumstances of her introduction to the estate. It stated that her presence created an uncomfortable precedent. It used language that was careful and formal and said nothing directly that could be easily challenged, but the meaning underneath the language was clear: she should not be there, and someone should do something about the fact that she was. Mara read the complaint twice. She set it on her desk face down. She sat with her hands in her lap and breathed steadily and gave herself exactly 60 seconds to feel whatever she needed to feel about it before putting it somewhere manageable. The 60 seconds passed. She turned the paper back over and read it a third time, this time looking at it as a document rather than as something aimed at her. She noted the language, the phrasing, the specific objections raised. She noted what it said and what it did not say. Then she picked up her pen and began drafting a response. She had not been asked to respond. The complaint had not been addressed to her. It had been submitted to the office of the Alpha King, meaning it was his to handle, not hers. She knew all of this. She drafted the response anyway, because whatever Dorian chose to do with the complaint, she wanted him to have something from her side, something factual and clear and free of emotion, that laid out exactly what her role was, what she had accomplished in 3 weeks, and why every aspect of her hiring had been appropriate and properly documented. She finished the draft. She read it over. She made 3 adjustments. She printed it and walked it to his office herself. He was in a meeting. She handed the document to his assistant, a man named Ellis, and asked him to pass it along when he had a moment. She went back to her desk and worked for the rest of the afternoon without stopping. At 6 in the evening, Ellis appeared at her office door and told her the Alpha King would like to see her when she had a moment. She closed the file she was working on and went. Dorian was at his desk when she came in, and the complaint document was in front of him, and so was her response. He looked up when she entered. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He held up her response. "You wrote this today?" "Yes." "Without being asked?" "Yes." He looked at it for a moment. "It is well argued." "It is accurate," she said. "Whether it is well argued depends on who is reading it." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one, contained and brief. "The complaint," he said, setting the papers down, "is without merit. I reviewed it this afternoon and I will be responding formally to that effect." He looked at her. "I wanted you to know that before you heard it through other channels." She held his gaze. "You don't have to keep explaining your decisions to me." "I know," he said. "I am doing it anyway." She looked at the window behind him, the one that faced west, where the evening light was coming in at an angle that turned everything gold. "They are not going to stop," she said. "People like Sylvia Crane and Hugh Forster. This will not be the last complaint." "Probably not," he agreed. "Does that concern you?" He considered the question with his usual unhurried attention. "What concerns me," he said, "is whether you are prepared to weather it." "I am always prepared to weather things," she said. "I have been doing it my entire life." He looked at her for a long moment, and she had the sense again that he was reading the larger version of what she was offering, the full text beneath the summary. "I know," he said quietly. "That is exactly what concerns me." Mara did not have an answer for that. She did not know what it meant for someone to be concerned about the fact that you had learned to endure too much and for too long. She did not know what the appropriate response was to being seen that clearly. She stood up. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Mara." She walked out into the corridor and down the hall and out into the evening air, which was cool and smelled like cut grass and the far edge of something blooming, and she stood in it for a moment with her eyes closed. She thought about the complaint. She thought about Harriet's expression and Gerard's tests and the table that went quiet. She thought about Owen and the empty kitchen and the borrowed dress. She thought about the marble floor and the broken glass and the moment when everything had gone gray. She thought about a man crossing a ballroom when nobody else moved, and the question of why, and the answer she had been given, and what it meant that the answer was still sitting somewhere inside her, turning over slowly, asking to be examined. She opened her eyes. The grounds were lit in the long gold of late afternoon. Somewhere nearby a window was open and she could hear voices, easy and distant. She exhaled. She went home. She made herself dinner. She ate it sitting at the small table by her window with the lamp on and the evening outside going slowly dark, and she thought about how different this felt from every evening she could remember before this one. It was not perfect. It was nowhere near simple. There were people in this place who wanted her gone and who would keep trying to make that happen, and there were days ahead that would require more steadiness than she currently felt, and there was a situation with a man she did not entirely understand that was becoming less possible to ignore with each conversation. But she was not on the floor of a ballroom. She was not in Owen's house. She was at a table of her own, with food she had cooked herself, in a space that was hers. That was not everything. But it was not nothing. It was, in fact, quite a great deal. She finished dinner. She washed the dishes. She went to bed and slept 8 hours without waking, which had not happened in so long she had forgotten what it felt like. When she woke in the morning, the sun was already up, and the day ahead was full of work she was capable of doing, and somewhere on the estate grounds a man who had no reason to keep seeing her was going to see her anyway, and she was going to have to decide, at some point, what she was going to do about all of it. Not today. Today she had 400 files to review and a system to refine and 2 assistants who were counting on her to know what she was doing. She got up. She got dressed. She went to work. She was very good at her job. She had always been very good at the things she decided to commit to. That, at least, was something nobody could take from her. The 6th week was when things became complicated in ways that could no longer be set aside. It began on a Tuesday with a meeting that Mara attended in her official capacity as part of the household administration, a routine gathering of department heads to review the calendar for the upcoming quarter. She had attended 2 of these previously and had found them manageable, if occasionally frustrating, primarily because of Gerard, who continued to treat every contribution she made as something to be verified rather than accepted. Sylvia Crane was at this meeting. She had not been at the previous 2. She sat 3 seats down from Mara at the long table and did not look at her directly, which Mara noted and catalogued. The meeting was unremarkable for most of its duration. Schedules were reviewed, responsibilities assigned, adjustments made to 2 events that had conflicting resource requirements. Mara took notes, offered 2 observations that were received neutrally, and prepared to close her folder and leave when the meeting concluded. Sylvia spoke as the meeting was officially ending. "I want to raise something informally," she said, which was how people introduced things they wanted to say without it being recorded. "There is a concern among several members of the team about the management of sensitive household information under the current administrative structure. The room went quiet in a way that felt prepared rather than spontaneous. Mara did not move. She kept her folder closed and her hands flat on the table and her face composed. That concern, Sylvia continued, without looking at Mara, is that the current structure may allow access to information that should be limited to personnel with a longer established trust record within this household. She still had not said Mara's name. She did not need to. Everyone in the room knew. Mara counted to 3 internally. Then she said, in a tone that was even and clear, if there is a specific concern about the information access protocols within the administrative function, I would be glad to review the current framework and present a detailed account of what information is accessed, by whom, under what circumstances, and what security measures are in place. I can have that documentation ready by the end of the week. Silence. That would be very thorough, said the department head running the meeting, a man named Arthur, who Mara had found to be consistently fair, in the tone of someone closing a conversation that had gotten close to a line. Sylvia said nothing further. The meeting ended. People gathered their things and moved toward the door. As Mara was collecting her folders, she became aware that someone had stopped beside her. She looked up. It was a woman she had not spoken with before, one of the senior members of the estate's legal office. Her name was Philippa, and she was somewhere in her 50s, and she had a precise, unhurried way of carrying herself that Mara had noticed in passing. Philippa said, quietly, well handled. Mara said, thank you. Philippa said nothing further and walked out. It was a small exchange. It settled something. The documentation was ready by Thursday. Mara sent a copy to Arthur and a copy to Dorian's office without announcement or explanation, simply as a record. Ellis confirmed receipt. On Friday, Dorian called her into his office and she found, when she arrived, that he was not alone. Arthur was there, and so was Philippa. Sit down, Dorian said. She sat. I have reviewed the documentation you submitted, he said. It is comprehensive. I have asked Arthur and Philippa to review it also. He looked at her steadily. I want to ask you directly, how are you holding up? She looked at Arthur and Philippa and then back at Dorian. I am fine, she said. The situation is manageable. Philippa tells me the Tuesday meeting was not your most comfortable hour, Dorian said. Mara glanced at Philippa, who had the expression of someone who did not regret reporting accurately. It was navigable, Mara said. It was also inappropriate, Dorian said, with a specificity that suggested he was being very precise about what had been inappropriate. What happened in that meeting was an attempt to undermine your position through implication without direct charge, which is the method people use when they do not have a legitimate case to make. He paused. I am addressing it formally. Mara looked at him. You do not need to do that on my behalf. I am doing it on behalf of a standard I hold for how people in this household are treated, he said. It applies to you as it would apply to anyone. She could have argued. She thought about arguing. She looked at Philippa, who was watching her with a calm expression that seemed to be saying, let the man do what is right, and at Arthur, who was nodding slightly, and at Dorian, who was looking at her with the directness she had come to expect and still had not found a way to make routine. All right, she said. He nodded. They discussed a few practical adjustments to her reporting structure, changes that would clarify her role and reduce the ambiguity that gave people like Sylvia room to maneuver. Mara contributed to the conversation practically and honestly. When Arthur and Philippa left, Dorian remained at his desk, and Mara gathered her things, and she was almost at the door when he said, Mara. She turned. He was looking at her from across the room, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the morning light was doing something particular with the space between them, and she was aware of it in a way she had been increasingly aware of things like that lately, the quality of light, the specific length of a silence, the way he looked at her versus how he looked at everything else. The documents you submitted, he said. The framework you built for the information protocols. It was more than what was asked. I know, she said. Why? She thought about it. Because if someone is going to question whether I should be trusted, she said, I would rather give them something complete enough that the questioning becomes obviously unnecessary. He looked at her for a moment. That is what you have been doing your whole life, he said. Giving people something so complete they cannot reasonably object. It landed somewhere precise and uncomfortable, the way accurate things did. Yes, she said. I suppose it is. That must be exhausting, he said. She looked at him. Not with offense. With something more complicated than offense. It is, she said. It is also the only way I have ever found to keep a foothold. He held her gaze. You have a foothold here that does not require that. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know how to operate on that basis, she said. I have not had enough practice. Something in his expression shifted, and it was not pity. She had learned to read the difference now. It was something warmer and more specific than pity, something she did not have an easy word for. Then practice here, he said. There is time. She looked at him across the room in the morning light and thought about time. About all the years she had spent moving through the world as though time was something she had very little of, as though she had to get to the other side of each day before it ran out. She was not sure what it meant to have time. She was not sure she entirely believed in it yet. But she nodded. Good night, she said, which was wrong because it was not evening, and she heard it as soon as she said it. He did not correct her. Good night, Mara, he said. She walked out into the hallway with warmth in her face and something building in her chest that she was going to have to examine very carefully and very soon, because it was getting too large to set aside and too real to pretend she did not know what it was. She walked back to her office and sat at her desk and put her hands flat on the surface and breathed. She knew what it was. She had known for some time. She had been calling it something else, gratitude, respect, the natural connection between two people who spoke honestly with each other, and all of those things were true and none of them were the whole truth. She was not sure what to do with the whole truth. She was not sure what someone like her did when someone like him had been this present in her life for 6 weeks and showed no sign of becoming less so. She pulled the nearest file toward her and opened it. She worked steadily and without stopping until the afternoon light faded and the office went quiet around her and Ellis knocked on her door to say the building was closing for the evening. She closed the file. She went home. She made tea. She sat at her small table with the lamp on and looked at the window and let herself think, properly and fully, about everything she had been filing away. She thought about it for a long time. When she finally slept, it was not with any decision made. But the weight of the thing felt different now that she had stopped pretending it was not there. Lighter, somehow. More manageable. She had spent her entire life carrying things in silence. She was learning, slowly and imperfectly, what happened when you acknowledged what you were carrying. It did not go away. But it became something you were choosing to hold, rather than something that had simply been placed on you without your consent. That was a difference worth knowing about. The morning she finally spoke plainly about it, she had not planned to. She had planned to go to Dorian's office to clarify a scheduling matter, a brief and entirely professional visit that would take 4 minutes at most. She had the relevant papers in her folder. She had the question formulated. She had considered whether it required a direct conversation or could be handled by message, and had decided on a direct conversation because the schedule matter was time-sensitive. What she had not planned for was finding him standing at his office window with his back to the door when she arrived, and Ellis having already told her to go in, and him turning when she entered with an expression that was not quite the composed steadiness she was accustomed to. It was something adjacent to it, something slightly less assembled, and she filed that observation away in the same place she had been filing similar observations for weeks. The Henderson event, she began, opening her folder. Can I ask you something first? He said. She stopped. Yes. He looked at her across the room. He was not at his desk. He was still near the window, and the light from outside made the room feel open, and he said, quietly and without any preamble, "What are you planning to do?" She blinked. "About the Henderson event?" "About this," he said. She understood immediately what he meant, which told her something about how clearly she had been thinking about the same thing. She held his gaze. "I have been trying to determine that," she said. And I do not have an answer that is fully formed." She looked at the folder in her hands. Then back at him. "I know what I feel. I have known for some time. What I have not known is what to do with it, given the nature of our positions and the circumstances of how I came to be here." "The circumstances do not determine the reality," he said. "No," she said. "But they complicate it." "Yes," he agreed. He was still looking at her steadily. "They do." She set the folder down on the nearest surface. She looked at him and he looked at her, and the room was quiet in the particular way that rooms are quiet when something is about to be said that will matter permanently. "I grew up," she said, "believing that care was conditional. That if you were not useful or convenient or unproblematic, the care stopped. I built my entire life on that premise. I became someone who made herself as useful and unproblematic as possible so that the conditional nature of other people's care would not cost me too much." He was listening with his full attention. "You have not been conditional," she said. "You were there when I collapsed on your floor and you did not look away. You gave me work that treated me as a capable person. You responded to the complaints against me without being asked to. You came to check on me when nobody required you to." She paused. "And I have been telling myself it was professional courtesy, and I have known for weeks that it was not only that." "No," he said. "It has not been only that for some time." She exhaled. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "I am telling you honestly. I have not had much practice at accepting things that are not conditional." "I know," he said. He crossed the room slowly, not rushing the distance between them, and he stopped a few feet from her. "I am not asking you to be certain. I am asking you to be willing to try." She looked at him. At the man who had crossed a ballroom when no one else moved. Who had asked when she had last eaten. Who had let her eat without watching. Who had built her a foothold and then kept standing near it in case she needed steadying. "I am willing," she said. He held out his hand. Not to help her up from anywhere. Just a hand extended between them, open and unhurried. She looked at it for a moment the way she had looked at his hand on the ballroom floor, with the full awareness of what it meant to take it. She took it. He did not say anything after that. He did not need to. They stood in the morning light of his office with their hands linked and the day going on around them, and it was quiet in the best way, the way that is quiet because nothing necessary has been left unsaid. The Henderson file got reviewed eventually. The scheduling matter was resolved. The work of the day continued and the work of the following days continued, and the territory went on as it always did, full of people and events and the constant motion of a place that did not stop for anyone. But something had been set down between them and given a name, and names had a way of making things solid, of turning what might have remained shapeless into something you could build on. They were careful with it. That was the right word. They did not rush, and they did not announce, and they moved into whatever it was becoming with the specific deliberateness of two people who understood the value of things done thoughtfully. Sylvia Crane submitted one more complaint. It was addressed formally and dismissed formally, and it was the last one. Harriet's expression modulated over weeks from disapproval to something neutraler, not warmth, but the absence of active opposition, which was its own kind of progress. Gerard stopped testing and started, hesitantly, treating her contributions as contributions. Philippa invited her to lunch 3 weeks after the Tuesday meeting, and it was quiet and easy, and Philippa said very little directly about anything but communicated, clearly and without sentimentality, that Mara had allies in this place and that they had been watching and they had decided she was worth the watching. Owen sent a message on a Sunday asking if she was all right. She replied that she was. He replied that he was glad, and there were no more words after that, and she sat with the weight of 13 years of what they had not been to each other and allowed herself to feel it and then allowed herself to set it down, not forgive exactly, but release, which was something she had been carrying for a long time and which was lighter than expected once she put it on the ground. She thought about the ballroom sometimes. About the marble floor and the broken glass and the way the music had kept playing while she lay there. About the specific weight of being invisible in a room full of light. She thought about it without pain, the way you think about a road you had to travel to get somewhere, not the destination you would have chosen but the one that brought you here. Here was an office with 18 months of files now in order. Here was an apartment that was hers, with a kettle and a lamp and a small table where she ate her meals in the kind of quiet that was chosen rather than imposed. Here was a place in a household where she was known and, increasingly, where she knew. Here was a man who had looked at her on the floor of his ballroom and crossed the room and crouched down and extended his hand, and had been in one form or another extending it ever since, and to whom she had eventually, finally, extended hers in return. She had spent so long believing that the circumstances of her life were the fixed terms of it, that the way things had been was the way they would remain, that she had been trained so thoroughly into smallness that she would never fully unlearn it. She was unlearning it. Slowly, and with resistance, and in the way that real change happens, not in a moment but in the accumulation of moments, each one small, each one tilting something further from where it had been. The morning she walked into the administrative office and found a vase of flowers on her desk and no note attached to them, she looked at them for a long time. She did not need a note. She knew. She sat down. She put her hand next to the flowers for a moment, touching the edge of the vase lightly. She thought about hunger. Not just the physical kind, though she knew that kind well enough. She thought about the hunger that comes from being overlooked for so long you begin to believe you are invisible, that nobody will look, that looking is something that happens to other people in other circumstances with better luck than yours. She had been wrong about that. She had been wrong about a great many things she had assumed were permanent. The flowers were pale yellow, the kind that open slowly and last longer than you expect. She did not know what kind they were. She would ask. She turned to her desk and opened the first file of the day. Outside, the grounds were bright and the day was going about its business, and somewhere in this building there was a man who had decided a long time ago that seeing her was worth the effort, and she had decided the same about him, and that was not a small thing. It was, if she was being accurate about it, which she had learned to be, quite a large thing indeed. She settled into her chair and began to work, and the morning moved around her, warm and steady and full of the specific quality of days when you are no longer just getting through them. She was, she realized, no longer just getting through. She was in it. Present and accounted for. That was, after everything, enough to build the rest of a life on.